Hi, I'm Buddy Lyons. I'm the CEO of Entac Medical. Entac is developing an exciting novel technology called audio spectral analysis to predict and diagnose certain medical conditions. We essentially answer two questions. What does a health condition sound like, and how many of those sounds denote that particular condition? The way it's done essentially is that we record sound from a particular part of the body, and we parse that sound of the audio spectrum into its various component parts. And we we listen for an audio signature that's highly correlated to that particular condition, and then we design an algorithm to notice that within a patient. This problem was originally came up for a colorectal surgeon who was trying to find an answer to postoperative ileus. Postoperative ileus is acute paralysis of the GI tract that begins approximately 2 to 6 days after surgery. The problem is that no one knows which patients are going to develop it. And so there's no test or device to predict which patients will develop that. And that leads to suboptimal care because the physician doesn't know how to treat them. Suboptimal care leads to much longer lengths of stay and much higher readmission rates, which dramatically increases the cost and reduces the reimbursement rates for hospitals. Just to give you a sense of the magnitude of the problem, there are approximately 2 million GI surgeries a year where a patient may develop this condition. About 25% of those patients will develop the condition, and the length of stay, average length of stay of those patients is almost 10 days, which is a very, very long time. About 20% of those patients come back to the emergency room for treatment because they've been let out too early and ileus develops at home. So sometimes a physician will keep a patient in the hospital 2 to 6 days longer than necessary, what we call ileus watch, waiting to see if that patient will develop ileus. In 75% of the cases, they don't. So $3,000 to $15,000 have been needlessly spent keeping that patient in the hospital. Also, 20% of these patients come back to the emergency room because they develop ileus at home. So you're increasing the cost $10,000 to $20,000 on that particular patient's hospital bill. The average unnecessary cost per surgery is well over $5,000 per patient. And nationally, for one category of surgery, this is a $10 to $15 billion burden on the system when it really should be a fraction of that if you knew which patients were going to develop ileus. Well, now, using audio spectral analysis, you do. Entac is developing a product called Previs EA, which you'll see here on the screen. It's a 3-inch disc that attaches to the patient's abdomen. It's the first of many applications we believe using this type of technology. It accurately predicts which patients are going to develop ileus. So it's going to tell you right now what's going to happen 2 to 6 days from now. It's a Class 2 device, it's non-invasive, and it's disposable. We'll talk about the Class 2 and its significance in a minute. And it has algorithms designed to detect that specific audio signature for ileus. So we have the components of this it's a 3-inch diameter device. Inside it has a microchip, it has a microphone for recording, it has a battery, and it has this LED display here, which is going to display a number. So it assesses the patient's risk of ileus within 12 hours of surgery. So recall that ileus doesn't occur until 2 to 6 days after surgery, so the surgeon has plenty of time to make a treatment decision. So how does this work? It's applied to the patient's abdomen, and it listens for this audio signature MH4 over a 4-minute period. It displays that number on this middle LED display, and if the patient has above 55 MH4 counts in that 4-minute period, there's a low risk of ileus. If it has below 50 MH4 counts in that period, there's a very high risk of ileus. So in our proof of concept trial with this, there were 30 colorectal surgery patients. We only recorded the bowel sound for one 4-minute period and got a highly statistically significant inverse correlation between the MH4 counts and the ileus risk, meaning just what we said before. A high count of MH4, a low risk of ileus, a low count of MH4, a high risk of ileus. Now, these are measured in specificity and sensitivity. And specificity means that if Previs predicted that the patient would have no ileus, in 95% of the cases, the patient does not develop ileus. Sensitivity is just the opposite. If it predicts ileus will occur, then in 83% of those cases, ileus did occur. Those are very good numbers for any sort of diagnostic or predictive test, but we can get those better as well, as we learned in the proof of concept trial, by adding a couple of simple things like noise cancellation to the final device. So what's the value proposition? Well, first of all, the risk of postoperative ileus is known to the surgeon, and so he knows how to treat his patient after surgery. There are better patient outcomes that lead directly to quantifiable economic benefits, and those two things are vital in this healthcare environment with getting new products approved and paid for. First of all, you're going to reduce the hospital stay for 75% of the patients by 2 to 6 days, so you're going to save $3,000 to $15,000. Second, the readmission rates are going to go for something like 20% to near zero, and the hospital is going to avoid that $10,000 to $20,000 treatment cost. And lastly, the patients who do not need drug therapy to help treat ileus won't receive drug therapy, and so you'll save $500 to $1,000 on drug therapy care for patients that don't need it. There's some additional very important benefits that are somewhat less quantifiable now because the data is not available, but improve patient satisfaction because most of them are getting out of the hospital sooner, and physicians know how to treat them and mitigate some of the effects of ileus. That's very important for Medicare because that's playing into right now how Medicare is going to reimburse a hospital for these procedures. A shorter length of stay reduces hospital-acquired infections. Those hospital-acquired infections are not paid for by Medicare anymore if they occur to the patient within 30 days of discharge. The hospital has to eat that cost, and those costs are somewhere between $10,000 and $150,000. So to eat that cost is a significant burden to a hospital. And you're going to have happier surgeons. All over the country, hospital systems are tying physician pay to patient metrics like length of stay and readmission rates. So that this is the first time that has ever occurred. And so they will have a personal interest to maximize their own income in using something like Previs. So what does it mean for the patient? And this is the most important part of it. You withhold nutrition if the patient is at high risk so you don't exacerbate ileus when it does occur. You can administer the proper drug therapy aggressively for the patient. You can consistently monitor them so they don't develop things like pneumonia from aspiration that for elderly patients can be lethal. And you avoid them developing ileus at home and then just returning to the ER several days later because they've developed it there. For low-risk patients, they're getting out of the hospital much earlier than they would have. There's no unnecessary nasogastric tube where they stick the tube up your nose and into your stomach to pump things out of it, and they do that sometimes unnecessarily to patients who aren't going to develop ileus because they don't know. Early oral nutrition is absolutely key to these patients because it's the #1 factor in their recovery. And so the earlier you can start feeding them, the more quickly they will recover from their surgery. They're also going to avoid potential surgical site infections, which is the #2 reason for the return to the hospital. So that benefits both the patient and the hospital because the hospital won't have to treat the infection. So finally, there's a standard of care where there was no standard of care before. You're going to have better patient outcomes, significant cost savings, and higher reimbursement to hospitals. So everybody wins. As an example of that, we We have a reference hospital where they actually do about 3,000 of these procedures a year. That's a lot of these types of procedures. We estimate that we could save them over $2.5 million per 300 patients, or $26 million, which is 2.1% of the entire hospital operating budget. So that's how significant it is, the treatment cost for these patients. And on average, you'll save almost $9,000 per patient. So where is Entac in the development of Previs? Well, thus far, we've completed one seed round worth $200,000. And with that seed capital, we have filed IP in all the appropriate jurisdictions around the world, US, Japan, the EU, the BRIC countries, Eurasia. We've completed two rounds of prototype development, and the final could be completed 8 to 12 weeks post-funding. We've achieved a Class 2 designation with the FDA, which is huge for mitigating regulatory risk. We'll talk about that in a moment. And the FDA has actually designated for us our predicate device, which goes along with that Class 2 designation, is an electronic stethoscope, and we'll tell you why we're excited about that as well. So from here, where do we need to go? Well, in month one of funding, we would finish the development in 8 to 12 weeks of the final device. And we would begin an optimization trial of 100 to 200 patients to make sure that when we go into the regulatory trial that we have exactly the right device that we need. That part of the program will cost about $600,000, and it'll be done at the University of Iowa. At month 8, we will initiate the regulatory trial after we're sure that the device is optimized. However, there are also some other very important activities. That data from that optimization trial is very valuable to Entac and actually increases the valuation of Entac by multiples because we can go back with that data to large medical device companies that have expressed an interest in seeing data with the final device to potentially out-license the device, sell the company, do some sort of strategic deal. So it's possible, though we're not promising, it could be a liquidity event there. Also, we're not really planning on this, but if we need to go out and commercialize this ourselves, we can go back and re-engage some very large VCs who have expressed interest in coming in at that particular part of the plan. You can see that the trial that we have set up are at some very prestigious locations around the country, like the Cleveland Clinic, the Mayo Clinic, Harvard, Vanderbilt. The significance of the University of Minnesota cannot be overstated because it is the largest colorectal surgical practice in the world. So they have expressed extreme interest and really want to be in this trial. So about month 17, 9 months after we began the regulatory trial, the filings will be made in the US and the EU. The FDA is supposed to act within 90 days, but that's probably not going to happen. So we've given them 7 months to give us marketing clearance for the device. So what is the impact of Previs financially for the company? Well, in the US and the EU alone, there are 4.5 million procedures a year. It's a $250 device, we believe, at minimum. And so the market between those two jurisdictions will be over $1 billion. The margins on this are very high at over 80%. Now, there are lots of numbers here, but if you'll just reflect on the bottom here, you can see this ramp up. And we have a very conservative ramp up, saying that we would maybe get 2% of the market in the first year after we launch, up to about 27% in the 5th year. Now, in larger hands, this ramp up would be much faster, and the peak of a medical device is sometime in the 7th or 8th year. So this 27% would probably be more like 50% if a larger player is selling it. And there's no competition, so there's nobody out there competing against us to take revenue from us. Back to this Class 2 issue that we think is so important. This really mitigates the risk for us. There are various classes of medical devices. This is a Class 2, and what it says is if there's a device on the market that's somewhat similar, you can compare your device to that device, and you can get it approved earlier with a shorter filing. Well, the FDA has told us that Our predicate device is an electronic stethoscope, and we're thrilled about that. There's really no commonality between these two devices, except they extract data from the body without introducing any energy. But what that says is that the FDA recognizes the safety, which is over half the battle. They also recommended that we get the trial approved by a central institutional review board instead of having to come to them to approve our trial protocol. Again, they recognize the safety of the device. And so what we really need to do for them is to run one 6-month clinical trial that's necessary for them to clear the device for marketing. That clinical trial will be at 8 to 10 sites. We'll have 150 to 200 patients. The primary endpoints will be the specificity and the sensitivity that we've discussed. And the secondary endpoints are really more for marketing purposes that we'll have available to us or our partner when we go to launch the product. Those include length of stay, readmission, economic benefits, so we can demonstrate that to not only colorectal surgeons, but also to hospital administrators. So who are we, the key members of our team? First, we have Richard Jones. He's the chairman. He's been with us about a year. We brought Richard on because he has actually done this before, and he's done it in laparoscopic surgery, which is used a lot in GI surgery. He formed a company called Medicor, took it from concept through clinical trials, ran the company for 5 years, and then had an exit. And so he did business here and had distributors in Europe. So he has the broad base and the experience we need to take the company to the next level. I'm the founder and CEO of the company. I've been involved in healthcare companies for about 20 years as an analyst and a consultant. My particular expertise are in intellectual property and clinical and operations and finance. Andrew Forsdick is the president of Addison Capital Advisors in Memphis, Tennessee. It's a firm that provides CFO services to startup businesses. They also have a portfolio of companies, venture companies that they have in their portfolio as well. John Cromwell is the colorectal surgeon who invented the device. He's at the University of Iowa. He's a clinical associate professor. He's also director of their GI, minimally invasive and bariatric surgery department. Not only that, he is a recognized expert in predictive medicine, which is rare right now in the country because predictive medicine is rather, it's just a nascent field. So John is very, very big into those circles. Bruce Brandis, we brought Bruce on at the end of last year because he's been in the digital health space, which is where we are. He's been with several startups who have been exited to larger companies before, most recently with Airstrip, which was a company with a mobility platform in diagnostics, and just knows the space and every facet of the business very well. Lots of experience there. And Mark Ham is our chief technology advisor, and to us, he's all things IT. He's helping us planning on building out a platform of services. He was the director of innovation at FedEx and the vice president of IT at AutoZone, and has a lot of experience in all things to do with the cloud, transmitting data, and device design. So we have a very experienced team in all facets of the business. So to summarize, there's no test or device to predict post-op ileus right now, and it's a very large problem and costing the system and individual hospitals a lot of money. This is the only solution out there, is Previs-EA. It's a huge global market, well over $1 billion, particularly when you include countries beyond the US and the EU. It has Class 2 status, and it's the last prototype is very close to being finished. It's a platform technology which gives us, helps us to increase the valuation of the company, and we'll talk about that in a minute as well. We have significant interest from some large medical device companies who are interested in licensing the device, purchasing the company, or some other kind of strategic arrangement. There will be a substantial increase in valuation, we believe, with positive results from the upcoming optimization trial within about 8 months of funding. And so we're seeking a total of $2 million in capital to fund the company through marketing clearance in the United States and the EU. but I know you have questions about what are our plans for exiting the company. We believe that there are various points along the way in the next 1 to 4 years where we can exit, have a liquidity event. Those priorities are to sell the company or out-license the IP to a larger strategic investor. We can operate the company till we reach an appropriate sales level and then exit the company, which often occurs as stay-in time. We can out-license specific audio spectral applications to companies and keep the company as an R&D company, increasing the value of the technology as a whole. Or we could operate it indefinitely with Previs being our flagship product. That is the least likely option that we would have because of the interest that's been shown in the medical device community. However, for contingency planning, we have to be ready to take this product to market. We think it's a unique market, a very addressable market for a small company to reach if we had to. There are only 1,400 board-certified colorectal surgeons in the United States today. 900 of those are attached to 400 teaching hospitals. So we're basically talking about 400 teaching hospitals that we have to reach first. There's a high volume of general surgeons that will follow the standard of care that's set by the colorectal surgeons. However, this all takes place in 2,500 or less hospitals within the United States. So it's the call point, the number of call points within the US at least, are very, very small. In Europe, if we did something like this, we would likely find a distributor or a partner to license the technology to. So for the future, it has many medical applications. With the current version of what we have, we can use this in other surgeries for post-op ileus. Traumatic brain injury patients develop a lot of ileus, and that needs to be diagnosed more effectively. Also, premature infants are at risk for a condition called necrotizing enterocolitis, where their bowels are not well formed, blood flow does not flow real well, and the tissue dies. The big call there is when you start feeding them orally. This could tell them when the bowel function is appropriate to start oral feeding. We're really excited about the next particular generation, which can be an outpatient diagnostic for GI functional and dysmotility disorders. There are probably 10 to 12 different disorders that inhibit proper peristalsis of the GI tract. And really the testing that's done to stay in time does not directly point to a particular disease. You do testing and you exclude other diseases, so it's just diagnosis by exclusion. This could actually, Previs could be the first diagnostic to actually be able to pinpoint a disease by doing it by audio spectral analysis. Our nearest term opportunity, though, is an extension of what we're already doing. It's home use. Approximately 11% of patients who go home experience some kind of post-op complication 2 to 4 weeks after surgery. This can be adhesions, obstructions, problems with a colostomy. There's a whole host of conditions. Audio could be used to pick up on these very early. These patients typically end up back in the ER, which is very expensive. One late case of pancreatitis will cost you $16,000 in the average ER. If you can pick up on some of these early, even before the patient knows something's going wrong with them, a lot of these could be dealt with in a physician's office or by home health, which are both much less expensive alternatives than sending somebody back to the ER. It would be a huge cost savings for the system. Several of these actually lead to what's called paralytic ileus, and we're actually going to test some of this in the upcoming optimization trial. So it has the potential to double the market size of Previs. If not only every patient has one in the hospital, but they also take one home to monitor their condition afterwards. That's our presentation. Thank you for listening to us.